So once again, thank you so much for all the online attendees of this conference and all the in-person attendees here at Radisson Blu St. Julian's for the second and last part of this conference, the culmination of a almost three-year project named Transform, Raising Standards of Healthcare Service Provision for LGBTIQ people. The second and last part is focusing on various best practices, experiences from different speakers, including another panel discussion moderated by Dr. Marceline Manaudi. However, now I'm delighted to introduce with us, virtually though, Dr. Keenan Russell from ILGA Europe. They joined ILGA Europe in 2019, and he's going to share different insights, knowledge, and experience. So, Dr. Russell, the floor is yours.
I'd like to begin just by thanking the Maltese government, the Human Rights Directive in particular, for their extensive work on what has been both a challenging and very informative project for us. My role today is to speak a bit about challenges caused by anti-trans movements when it comes to providing healthcare services for trans and LGBTIQ people. And I'd like to start that intervention by reflecting a bit on the gains that Malta has made in recent years, and particularly on the law around depathologization, or the legal standard that Malta has that requires that trans people seeking trans healthcare not be pathologized in the process of seeking that care. That framework is the gold standard and was ahead of, but has now been caught up by the World Health Organization and the World Health Assembly with the publication and launch of the International Classification of Diseases version 11, which removes mental health related diagnoses for trans people from the chapter on mental and behavioral disorders. I start this conversation here because while Malta has set and maintained this standard for some time, there are many countries across the region in Europe and Central Asia where the discussion about whether or not trans people are sick, whether or not trans people need a diagnosis, is not nearly as advanced. I do not see from my position working for a regional network the entrenchment of anti-trans arguments and anti-trans actors in Malta today as there are in many other countries. But I think it's really important for us to be prepared for the potentiality that Malta may face these same challenges in the future. Across the region, we see dramatic increases in anti-trans activity, and it's from really multiple sources. Historically, we largely saw anti-trans discourse coming from the far right, from religious institutions, some of them, not all, and from political far-right actors. But in more recent years in Europe, we've seen the rise of anti-trans narratives and discourse coming also from works or groups supposedly working towards the advancement of women's rights, as well as from groups who purport to be comprised of concerned parents who express a concern about the treatment that their children have, those being trans children or children questioning their gender. I think it's important to understand that all three of these groups are a portion of the larger part of society that distrusts science and distrusts doctors. And they're not a unique, separate piece, but in fact are part of a larger milieu working together to undermine the authority that scientists and doctors have in our society. And we've seen a different side of that same group of people who are part of anti-vaccination movements or promoting conspiracy theories about the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the same underlying group of principles, which is to say that scientists and doctors are not an authority, that democracy and democratic protection of human rights are not the role of the state, and that access to social justice that individuals need is also not the role of the state to protect. That we should all be fighting for our own individual advancement rather than seeing those who are marginalized as both worthy of and deserving of state protections from marginalization, exclusion, and other types of discrimination. When focusing in on anti-trans arguments, there's one specific thread around a desire to supposedly save trans people and people who are questioning their gender from making mistakes in their own lives. And this is a thread of argument that I think is important for us to unpack as we think about the challenges in ensuring access to healthcare. Because the assertion that pathologization, that psychological assessment, or that third-party oversight saves people from making mistakes is one that is inherently linked to depriving people of autonomy and depriving people of their self-determination, which are human rights. And so is the role of the state to intervene in very personal decisions, or of the medical establishment to intervene in very personal decisions about one's own body, about one's own medical treatment, to prevent us from making potential mistakes. I think in general, as a society, we've made the decision that the answer here is no. The state's role is not, for example, to intervene to stop us from getting married, even though about half of marriages end in divorce. The state's role is not to intervene to stop us from having children, even though that, according to a good deal of research, negatively impacts both the economic and, in some cases, mental health well-being of parents. The state's role is not to intervene to stop us from changing religion or adopting a religion. In fact, there are clear prohibitions against this. So why, when talking about transition-related healthcare, are we more allowing of the argument that the state or the medical establishment's role is to intervene to stop us from potentially making a mistake? We're allowant of that argument because of generalized misinformation about trans people, generalized misinformation specifically about trans healthcare, and a misunderstanding in the general public of what goes into transition-related healthcare, and personal fear of trans people and of what trans people represent. It's clear to many trans people and people in the trans movement that our movement represents questioning some of the basic tenets that are assumed to be true about our society, that our bodies define who we are and who we can be, that the social constructs applied to our bodies are appropriate and should continue throughout our lives, that marginalization or discrimination based on those bodies is an inherent and entrenched part of our societies, and we cannot make decisions about our bodies that might change our position or allow us to interact with society in a different way. These are actually quite scary questions for the general public, who frequently depend on those cultural understandings to help feel comfortable in their own position in society. It's frightening to be positioned to ask yourself, is this thing that I have always believed about how society works and my role in society actually real? Or could I change something, and what might happen? Those are scary questions. And so I can understand being afraid of having those questions be normalized. But the packaging that we hear is not about that fear. The packaging is about the risk to trans people, but also risks to children and to women caused by allowing trans people to transition and to access transition-related medical care. One of the pieces that's important for us as promoters of trans health, as medical providers, and as those working in trans healthcare, is to be able to see and understand the tactics that our opponents use. Those frequently include fear-mongering and presenting sort of worst-case scenario anecdotes, division, and trying to sow discord between historical allies, for example, the trans movement and the women's rights and feminist movements, who are historical allies but are being divided now by these types of arguments, and distraction. And in the context of distraction, I mean that anti-trans actors frequently bring up either falsehoods or individual anecdotes to try to change the conversation onto something that isn't really the reality, but it invokes that fear and may get people into a position of opposing transition-related healthcare and access to that healthcare, even if it doesn't necessarily fit with their overall view on society. I'm going to wrap up here, and I'll be in the panel as well in a moment. But I want to present just a couple of suggestions as closing pieces to this keynote. The first one is to acknowledge that trans people and trans organizations are required to manage the activities of anti-trans actors, to respond to these. And there's an important role for healthcare providers in that process. The first of them is that there is a gap in the expert voice. And trans-related healthcare providers can step into that role to provide a supportive, affirming voice to the public debate. The second one is being prepared to acknowledge and respond to bad faith arguments, which are the frequent tactic of anti-trans opposition. So that means educating ourselves to know what these arguments are, be able to recognize them, and know how to respond. The third piece is to ensure that the work that we do doesn't create additional exposure, risk, or additional work for trans organizations and trans movements who are already stretched very thin in responding to anti-trans actors. And the final, that I think is perhaps the most important, is to uplift positive stories of transition-related healthcare. We see quite frequently in the media hyper-focus on anecdotes of bad stories, of stories where transition was the wrong choice, where someone or retransitioned later, and the harm caused to them. But we don't hear the vast majority of stories where transition was absolutely the right choice and it saved an individual's life. And so if you are in a position of speaking about transition-related healthcare, that's one of the most important pieces to do, is ensure that you're talking about the majority of cases where transition-related care saved our lives. And with that, I'll conclude. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Russell, for sharing with us some insights regarding the anti-trans movements, and thank you for remaining with us for the next panel discussion, which is being moderated by an activist, a social worker by profession, an academic at the Department of Gender and Sexualities at the Universities of Malta. Please join me in welcoming on stage Dr. Marceline Manaudi. So while Dr. Manaudi is joining us on stage, let's watch the next video.
Inti professjonist fil-kura tas-saħħa? Issa tista' taċċessa s-sit transhealth.gov.mt, riżorsa li tipprovdi informazzjoni estensiva ta' kif tista' tindirizza aħjar il-bżonnijiet tas-saħħa ta' pazjenti trans. Is-sit elettroniku huwa maqsum fi 3 sezzjonijiet primarji li jħarsu lejn is-saħħa ġenerali, kura psikoloġika u kura speċifika għal persuni trans, kif ukoll numru ta' skedi informattivi li jistgħu jitniżlu. Issibu kull informazzjoni dwar is-servizzi tal-klinika għal benesseri tal-ġeneru, inklużi il-proċess ta' riferiment u l-pjan tal-kura. Dan il-proġett huwa parzjalment iffinanzjat mill-Programma Drittijiet, l-Ugwaljanza u ċ-Ċittadinanza tal-Unjoni Ewropea.
Nista' nibda naħseb u hekk. Sorry. Hello. As you have just heard, I am Marceline Manaudi, and we're going to have a panel which also includes Keenan online. And here together we have Colette Farrugia-Bennett, who is a social worker and a family therapist. She has experience in working with LGBTIQ individuals and families in her work with the Gender Wellbeing Clinic, also with the Rainbow Support Service that we heard about earlier, and also in private practice. Her recent research has focused on the narratives of parents of gender variant and trans youth, which was part of her training in family therapy. I'll just remove my mask so that maybe you can hear me a bit more clearly. Sorry about that. We also have Anna Schmidt, who has an MSc in Human Resources Management and Development and a diploma in midwifery. She's a manager in training and development at Mater Dei. And her main roles and responsibility are, amongst others, to organize, implement, and assess training programs for the healthcare professionals working within the various departments and specific specialities of the organization. We also have Dr. Jason Bonici, who is a specialist in family medicine, commonly known as a family doctor or a general practitioner. He's the honorary secretary of both the Malta College of Family Doctors and the Association of Private Family Doctors. He's a trainer in the specialist training program for specialists in family medicine and a tutor for community attachments of medical students. And of course, we have Keenan, who is online, who has already been introduced. So welcome to all of them. If you will allow me, I will start by just commenting slightly that I am a women's rights activist, advocate, academic, feminist, but I fully support the LGBTIQ in its full diversity, and I'm also an activist, advocate, academic in this field. And the importance of uniting, not allowing the things that Keenan spoke to us about to divide us. Women's rights also have been clearly part of this backlash across Europe, which was mentioned by several of the other speakers earlier. So just to say that it is so important that at times like this, when we are being attacked and we are being like divide and rule, we need to stick together and to unite. Now, of course, we are here to talk about the Transform project. We are here to talk about issues of healthcare within the LGBTIQ community. So I would like to start by asking each of the panelists, and I'm going to start with you, Colette, to just speak to us a couple of minutes about the positive things that have come out of this Transform project. All of the people were involved, all of the panelists were involved in some way or another within the project. So, Colette, if I might pass on to you.
Yes, I think first of all, as a member of the Gender Wellbeing Clinic, I had the opportunity to attend both training, international training, and also be part of the discussions that were being held with the people from Ghent, who were, very helpful in terms of supporting both the structure and the development of the clinic as well. Although it had been in operation for some time, I mean, like for a year or so, we had the opportunity to continue to discuss and learn, especially in terms of also some of us had the opportunity to attend for training as well. So the reality is that we were pretty much alone before. We had tried to get some expertise from other countries. However, I think what Ghent offered us, so through this project, made more sense because it fit into the practice that we were basically embarking on with our clients. But another thing that I think was very, although I was not involved as much, but I know through Michelle, was that we had the opportunity to give training to a number of healthcare professionals, which was mentioned earlier. And I think those were some of the challenges that even as with another hat, like through MGRM, we had been trying to, access healthcare professionals to, educate, to raise awareness. And I think because it came from within, then it was the perfect opportunity and there was the door that opened kind of and it allowed for this exchange of ideas. So I think that for me was one of the most, taking away point from this project.
Thank you, Colette. And in fact, that leads us straight to Anna, because she was instrumental in gathering and accessing several of the healthcare professionals. So Anna, maybe you can tell us as well in In relation to your area, what were the advantages, what were the benefits, what were the positive takeaways from the project?
As rightly so was explained earlier, it had involved trainers, mainly the frontliners, and we also had a group of managers and practice development people. We also then organized a small training, which was required, actually wasn't really part of it, but it was required, to the heads of departments heading this training. Well, basically it was taken on very positively. There was the need for this training, obviously. It raised awareness, and it, I think, opened up many other avenues for people to be aware of this particular event.
Thank you, Anna, and it's good to hear that it was received positively, because as we heard earlier, sometimes it is received less easily, shall we say, rather than less positively. So it was good to see that you received positive feedback about the actual training. Jason, in relation to your part.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Yes, the Transform project was a fruitful experience of how this country can work together through various stakeholders through a common aim. I know that it sounds like a cliche because it has been sounded quite often during these few years of the pandemic, but it is true. Sometimes cliches are true. That is a way of working together, different stakeholders towards a common aim. The added experience of having expertise from countries who have been through this trajectory before is, of course, an added value to the project. And it has given also, it has been referred to before in this conference, us medical people think first and foremost about the disease, if it's present or not, and what medication to do. But as Dr. Mario-Kakia earlier said, so that's the least of the issues here. We have, and this project has taught that we have to go to a wider scope of well-being for the people who we communicate with, in this case, the LGBTIQ community or the trans people. Family doctors pride themselves in being supportive towards their, we call them patients, some of you call them clients, but we're talking about people at the end of the day. We pride ourselves in offering a service of support from the cradle to the grave. And we wish to be participant in this transformation that is taking place. That will involve a number of opportunities, that will involve a number of challenges. Maybe they will come up in the next questions. But definitely, this experience, this project, has been worth doing. I sincerely hope that an opportunity will be available for some aspects of the project which couldn't be done because of the pandemic to materialize, like meeting our colleague of ours personally, not only as a social contact, but also as a way of adding the professional input for some participants of the project, for some aspects of the project who could not be delivered. Like, for example, the opportunity of surgeons to see these operations abroad. Hopefully, an opportunity, and time and the money can be available for this part of the project to materialize as well.
Thank you, Jason. And indeed, it is a pity that COVID has impacted, of course, not just this project, but many, many others. And hopefully, there will be the opportunity for this to happen. Keenan, if you can give us just a few minutes about, what were the positive elements, the positive takeaways.
That the other speakers haven't touched on yet, which is the website. That was one of the pieces I was the most involved with, the sort of translation of UZ Ghent's TransInfoPoint website and updating of the material on that website. That piece of the work here that resulted in a trans healthcare set of guidance for Maltese doctors hosted on a Maltese government website is a unique and extremely important outcome of this project, in that it clarifies the position of the government and of the medical system in Malta in terms of the responsibilities of doctors to trans clients, to trans patients. It sets a clear standard that may well be a guide for other countries working to develop guidance for their own practitioners dealing with transition-related healthcare. And so I would say it's, from my point of view, an extremely positive, long-ranging impact output of this project.
Thank you, Keenan. Of course, we've heard a lot of positives throughout the whole morning, both in terms of the outlay of the project and in terms of the previous panel and the thing. So I think that maybe part of the aim of this project is also of this conference is also to look forward. So there've been a lot of positives, and that's very good. But of course, there are still many challenges. This is life. There are still many challenges. So maybe we could look a bit at what are the remaining challenges, and also what do we think maybe could be done about them. So I will give the floor back to Colette.
I think, first of all, one of the challenges in working with any community, I think, is keeping abreast with both the current research and practices, but also being in touch with the grassroots. And I think that is something that any service needs to always kind of be in touch with not just with the clients, because you're obviously rendering a service to them, but also consulting and bringing on board perhaps members of this community to also advise on how our services can be improved. And I think this is a challenge also because, of course, any service, first of all, focuses a lot of its energy in delivering that service. And with sometimes perhaps it's a bit of a Maltese tendency to kind of not involve the service users in the planning stages. Although I must say that within the gender clinic, I think there was at least the voice of trans people was definitely part of the planning, perhaps through MGRM, but also MGRM then took the opportunity to consult. However, I think this should be an ongoing matter, to always obviously seek the best quality of service for the people who need it.
So you're saying, sorry, had you finished, Colette?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you're saying it's important that it has been done a bit, but maybe it needs to be done a bit more. That we involve the actual service users in the where do we go now?
Yes.
How do we go forward? Thank you. Anna.
So the challenges encountered from the aspect of training, well, the internal challenges were mainly organizing the training that we do not deplete the service of the hospital. So we had to juggle quite a bit, but that wasn't really the biggest of the issues we had. And the attendance was very positive from both the frontliners, customer care, as well as the practice nurses and the management group. I think, and I still believe, that one challenge remains, but that is a general as well challenge, is the personal attitudes of our providers. Some took it on very positively and were open to implementing the training. Others felt probably that they had a bit of difficulty as in their personal attitudes and beliefs. So if that can be corrected and further sustained, I think that would be very helpful, that we will broaden this mentality of acceptance, giving care holistically. And it is not always the fact. although it seems so, it's not always the fact that personal attitudes do come into our professions. Another challenge from the evaluation of training I had evaluated was the Train the Trainer course. Now, although it was found to be very, very informative and it raised awareness, the people, and there was a large number of attendants. In fact, Mater, they had, I think, the largest of the participants in all. They still felt that it didn't give them enough confidence to train further their colleagues, further trainers. So that would be and remain one of the few challenges, I would say, as in training provided.
Thank you, Anna. And that's maybe that latter point is something which we need to note and we need to pick up. Colette was saying earlier with her MGRM hat that they had tried to access health professionals, and of course the health professionals were accessed through this, but maybe this is especially the people who are selected as sort of like the trainers of the rest can be given extra training so that they do feel confident, because of course if they don't feel confident then they're not going to get the message across. So it's very important that that happens. Jason, can I say something else before I give the floor to you? You mentioned about sort of doctors being there to heal the sick, so to speak, and that actually family doctors have a wider brief than that. I just wanted to add a little personal anecdote very, very quickly. When I was very young, I wanted to be a doctor. And then, as I grew older, I realized that the bit that I wanted to do as a doctor was go into people's homes, family doctor. And so we would have our family doctor who came into our home when my brother was sick or whoever, and my mother would tell him, how my daughter is worrying me dot. Kemm tinkwetani tifla dot. And the doctor, would also have this wider brief. And of course, that led me to become a social worker instead, because I realized that is actually where I can go into people's homes and they tell me, oh, I am so worried about this, and you can then actually help them. So I think that wider role that you mentioned earlier is really important. I'm sorry, Jason, I took some of your time, but I will hand over to you now in relation to how can we move forward, what are the things we still need to overcome.
Actually, your point will help me with one of the first of the three challenges that I have scribbled down. As Malta College of Family Doctors, we have been providing our doctors training to become specialists in family medicine, an idea of the gender well-being clinic since the start of the specialization course in 2007. We were the first specialty to have this specialization course in Malta. And there is already an attempt to give a wider outlook rather than medicalization of the gender well-being clinic in the session. But one of the experiences of this project is that this can be widened even more to be even more supportive for the people who seek help from us, and that in many ways we are able to provide more. The second challenge is then as the medical community. The medical services are expanding, they are becoming better and better. We are doing more. You may tell me that we are sometimes inventing even more diseases than ever before, but there are a number of challenges brought about by other professionals which we need to tackle about. In all of that, the person, the patient, the client has to remain the center of interest, of attraction, and that means that, let's be blunt, we need, as medical professionals, to communicate more and better with each other. We do it through a little bit of structure, we do it through a little bit of process, but definitely the structure can be better. If we are going to take the heed of the EU Commission and go for digitalization, that is an opportunity to provide more information which is relevant and useful, which the client can go around from one medical service to the other, and we all together provide a continuous provision of care for the good of the person. My last and third point is I reflected on what Kian has been speaking about. I agree with the experience and the future predictions that he was talking about, except on one teeny-weeny point. Dr. Kian said that some of the aggressive discourse can happen in Malta in the years to come. As family doctors, we have been talking socially and to each other. It is with us already. There is, to be fair, there is a growing number of people in our society who are more open, more welcoming, more democratic, and more open in their views, and that is gradually and steadily and surely increasing in numbers, and that's thanks to a number of stakeholders, especially in the education and social and family sectors. But yes, there is a small percentage of our population who are aggressive to many issues in our country, to items that would make us a more, the Maltese term is soċjetà iktar ħanina, a society which is more friendly and inclusive to all of us. The small section of the population is being more brazen-faced. It's speaking out louder, more consistently, and I don't have a solution to that, but at least I hope that one of the challenges that we can take forward for this issue and others is that we need to speak together and preempt what is already amongst us.
Thank you, Jason. And that last the last issue that you raised is indeed something which causes me personally a lot of worry, because I would agree, it's clearly there. And as I said, it is aggressive and hostile, if you like, not only towards LGBTIQ, but also towards women's rights. And it's being given, in Maltese we'd say, widen. It's being given greater attention. Okay. We're hearing about it more. It's being given. So although it is a small minority, they have a loud voice, and it's coming out. Keenan, I presume you're still online, although you have disappeared off my screen.
I'm here, yes.
You're there, okay. Maybe, again, you can tell us in terms of what challenges remain, how can we move forward?
Absolutely. I really appreciated in his first intervention, Dr. Bonici's reference to transition-related healthcare as a component of well-being care. And I think that one of the pieces that presents a challenge for sort of seeing the whole person and well-being in respect to LGBTIQ healthcare is the need to understand the way that the sort of cultural developments impact well-being, and how these things are inextricable, particularly for people who are minorities and part of and experience minority stress. Indeed, many trans people seek some or all of the information that they have about transition, about being trans, online, and the internet is a hotbed for anti-trans hostility that puts those people, particularly because they are frequently asking questions and not necessarily sure about themselves, at risk of a great deal of harm. And there's a need to move that conversation into a different tone and a different set of intentions, because we suffer from having this semi-anonymous space be the dominant space where discourse about trans issues and transitioning takes place, because it's very easily intervened upon by people with nefarious intent, and that causes a great deal of harm. And so if we see the family health practitioner, the general care practitioner, or any healthcare provider as part of their target is to ensure the well-being of their patients or their clients, there has to be an understanding that for those who are socially marginalized, well-being may be a much more complicated issue than eating better, sleeping more, going to the gym, what have you, disconnecting from work, but actually also figuring out how to manage the daily exposure to vitriol and to aggression that those communities experience, and figuring out what exactly is the role of healthcare providers in supporting people through that kind of stress.
Thank you, Keenan. Indeed. And especially, as we were saying, especially with online, there's a lot of online hate. Well, it's hate speech, whichever way you look at it, and abuse. And maybe this is something, I know there are some police officers present here, that this is something that they can also maybe help us do something about. Let's put it that way. We can now take a few questions from the floor, if there are any questions from the floor of the people present here, or anybody online. I assume somebody's monitoring the online. Yes? Yes, there are questions, or yes, no, there are no questions, but you're monitoring online. Okay, there is somebody monitoring online, so if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and they'll be picked up. Any questions from the floor here? No, you are a very silent. Oh, yes, we have one, thank you.
This is not really a question, but more of an encouragement. L-ewwel Proset, this project is like exemplary in encouraging literacy on the Maltese Islands. I come from the Ministry of Social Solidarity, Family and Children's Rights, and the research unit is currently coming up with different, like trying to think along the same lines as you do. Collaboration is important, and we do encourage further collaboration in sort of trying to get this kind of health literacy and literacy about other vulnerable groups towards social services as well, and also when it comes to giving people a holistic well-being and a holistic experience of their life. So yes, I do encourage further collaboration with ministries so that we could all work together and reach these pockets of society which maybe they're harder to reach as well, and where there is more discrimination and they lie on intersectionalities. So well done.
Thank you for that comment. And again, that is something which I hope will be picked up by the Sogitesk maybe unit and the health ministry, and maybe ministries can work closer together. This the idea of working together with others, which maybe is not the strongest point of the Maltese generally, but has been mentioned also by this panel here, and I think it is so important. And from this project, obviously this has happened, and it has happened well. So it would be good if it could be widened even further and include, for example, the Ministry of Social Solidarity and Family. Okay, any questions online in the meantime? No. Any other question or comment that people who are present here would like to make? Apparently not. If I'm missing something, tell me, but apparently not. Okay, so I will give each of the panelists a couple of minutes to give their final comment. And I will do that too, so I'll start and then I'll pass on to the rest of the panel. I think one thing which was mentioned, and something which I have always strongly stressed since 1994, when I first started teaching at the University of Malta. Some of you were not born during that time, I know, but hey, I was already teaching. Is this internalized, the way that we have internalized the gender stereotypes, the sexism, the misogyny, the homophobia, the biphobia, the transphobia, the way that we have literally absorbed simply by virtue of being brought up where we have been brought up. So I think that this was mentioned in the previous panel, and I think it's really important that we pick this up. Malta, well done, Malta. We have great laws, we have great policies, we have great projects like this, but we still have, a lot of the population still have this internalized homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and that is an area that really needs to be continue to be tackled. Obviously, it has been tackled, but an area that really needs to continue to be tackled. So that's my last comment, except for at the end, I'll say thank you, everybody, and so on. So, Colette, I'll pass to you, and then to Anna, and then to Jason, and then to Keenan. So, Colette.
I think as an activist who's been around for the past 20 years, I would say at the beginning it felt like we were very much alone, and adding on to what you were saying, and also sometimes seeing the comments online, even on the promotion around the results of this project, there's been quite a lot of transphobic comments on social media, at least the some that I saw. But it feels a bit different now. It doesn't feel alone anymore, and perhaps seeing how this collaboration of this project came about, and that there are other entities and actors that are taking the responsibility of raising awareness and challenging the stereotypes, challenging these thoughts. I think at least it feels that it's a shared responsibility rather than kind of always the LGBTIQ person shouldering all this responsibility on their own. So I really applaud, everyone who's been contributing towards this change, because it's been very helpful, and it feels a lighter load on us.
Thank you, Colette. Anna.
So training should not stop. I believe that it will keep on raising awareness. But as I have previously said, identifying those areas of needs where we need to probably have more specific training to enhance the further on training to the others.
Thank you, Anna. Jason?
Another cliché of the pandemic has been the search for a proper normal. Please, not the new normal, or definitely not the skewed old normal. In the search for a proper normal, I think this project Transform has been like a flagship, which shows that through collaboration, we can aim towards well-being of the people in our society, and that includes taking care of vulnerable groups. Thank you for all who were behind the idea and the proposal for projects such as Transform.
Thank you, Jason. And Keenan, I now pass on to you.
Thanks very much. I think my closing comment is that there's no need for anyone, including healthcare providers, to try to manage the anti-trans or anti-women's rights discourse that you're experiencing and hearing alone. And I think that the Gender Wellbeing Clinic and the Transform Project create an opportunity to connect, to network, to share both what you're hearing and how you're responding to it, and what's working and what isn't, in a way that also will make our efforts toward a more inclusive, holistic society both more effective and less taxing for everyone involved.
That's great, Keenan. Thank you. That's a very positive ending. So I will now say thank you very much to each of the panelists. Thank you very much for your contribution, both to the project, but also, obviously, to this panel here. It has been a pleasure moderating. It has been a pleasure moderating this panel. Thank you, obviously, to the Social Desk unit at HRD and everybody else who has participated in this project. Thank you. I believe there will now be a short video. Oh, sorry, well, you...
No, super, go ahead.
Okay, there's now a short video.
Transform, a collaborative project to raise the standard of healthcare for LGBTIQ people, took place between November 2019 and February 2022. The project aimed to build the capacity of healthcare providers in addressing the inequalities LGBTIQ people face when accessing healthcare. Throughout the project, 600 participants, including GPs, family doctors, emergency department personnel, nurses, allied health professionals, and reception staff, received training to enhance the awareness and capacity to better meet the needs of LGBTIQ patients.
I opted to come to this conference as we need to build up more awareness and knowledge about the LGBTIQ people, so that we could give them a better nursing service to them.
The project also promoted the exchange of good practices between Ghent University Hospital's gender team and the multidisciplinary team running the gender wellbeing clinic services in Malta. As part of this exercise, a team of professionals translated and adapted a website on trans healthcare, originally developed by our Belgian partners as a reference tool for healthcare practitioners. Simultaneously, the team behind this project commissioned awareness-raising campaigns on mental health, sexual health, and the trans-specific services offered by the Gender Wellbeing Clinic.
I'm Borch, charge nurse at the emergency department. I decided to participate in this program to increase my knowledge and more awareness about the LGBTIQ community. This will also help increasing the standards of healthcare within the LGBTIQ community in the emergency department.
Aħna nemmnu fl-ekwità mhux biss fl-ugwaljanza, u għalhekk huwa importanti li jkollna kampanji speċifiċi mirat lejn il-komunità LGBTIQ. Permezz din il-kampanja se nkunu qed nagħmlu pass ieħor il quddiem biex nirbħu iktar imħuħ u qlub favur il-komunità LGBTIQ.
The team promoted the material produced on various social media platforms. The Human Rights Directorate led the project in partnership with the Ministry of Health, Ghent University Hospital and its Transgender Info Point, the Malta College of Family Doctors, the Malta Union of Midwives and Nurses, ILGA Europe, Transgender Europe, and Steward Healthcare. This project was part-financed through the Rights, Equality, and Citizenship Programme of the European Union.
That's a nice rep. We wrapped up nicely, but I'd like to invite Gabby next to me. Just may I remind you, bearing with us just 2 minutes of your time to fill in the evaluation form. So you know all these EU-funded projects, we do need to just submit some documentation, just a tiny bit. So just a little bit of information. So Gabby, I'll just leave it to you to just conclude.
Thank you, Keith. Just some concluding comments as someone who has been involved in LGBTIQ equality advocacy for, as Colette said, around 20 years now. Of course, the work I do at the SOGIESC unit is more than just a job. And one of the professional lessons I've learned over the years is that if you want a successful project, it actually has to address a real need, right? It's not just about getting the funding, but it's getting the funding to do something which is purposeful and actually necessary, which is also why I think this Transform project was a success. We say this often, it would not be possible to advance LGBTIQ equality in Malta without the participation of a range of stakeholders. It is not the job of the SOGIESC unit to bring about LGBTIQ equality. It is not even the job of the LGBTIQ movement. It is everyone's responsibility. And the Transform project was simply one link in this chain that will hopefully lead us to ever-increasing inclusion of LGBTIQ equality in Maltese society. We are, in fact, already working on the development of our next project submission, so we always have more goals to achieve, and we might meet again, therefore, in the future. I'd like to end by thanking all our partners once again, all our collaborators, all the trainees who chose voluntarily to attend this training and to enhance their knowledge and their skills. And finally, my Sogigest unit team, minuscule as it is, but Aaron and Maronia, without whose constant work and commitment, even this final conference would not have been organized at relatively short notice. So thank you everyone for attending. Feel free to reach out to the Sogigest unit should you need information or wish to discuss any idea that you might have. All the resources of the project can be found on our project website. If you go to lgbtiq.gov.mt, there is a section of our website which is dedicated to the Transform project. All the resources produced through the project can be accessed there. Definitely, if any of you are interested in conducting training, we would also be willing to discuss this with you. So finally, I invite you to join us for lunch, which will be served at the restaurant at the hotel. So thank you very much.
So thank you, Gabby. Thank you so much for all of you for attending, for finding time. Hopefully your expectations aligned with our objectives that we wanted to achieve out of this conference. So I'd like to invite you for lunch, extending Gabby's invitation. Just join us from that way. Wish you all the very best and a wonderful rest of the day. Cheers, thanks.